I know that I can make friends.
I didn't do anything wrong.
I really hope things do get better soon, except right now it doesn't feel like anything's going to change.
Do you ever go to lunch with no one by your side? 'Cause the moment you arrive, they'll leave the table. Calling me everything but my name. Need I remind you again? Just call me Rachel. How would you feel if you're running home crying like yourself in your room? Don't want anyone to see ya. Good morning and welcome. Thank you for listening to Bat Talk with Sharona. I am your host. My name is Sharona. As always, I thank you for tuning in. You can find my work, by the way, at NFL Female, at Inside the Pylon, at Pro Player Insiders. You can also find me writing and doing a variety of things on my own website, Bat Talk with Sharona, and, of course, on this podcast, Bat Talk with Sharona, as well as on my Wednesday night show with Zach Law, Going for Two with Zach Law, with Zach and Sharona. Today's show is sort of dedicated to what's becoming a regular feature on the show, chopping it up with Matt. Matt Wood is a good friend of mine, and we've been sitting down every Wednesday night and chatting about a variety of topics. The genesis of it came out of a couple of articles that were posted in the non-believer community. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But first, some programming notes. I want to give a shout-out to my guest this week, Officer Darren Clark, who joined me on Monday to talk about people-focused policing. It was a great discussion with him regarding law enforcement and how we can better improve communication. Communication is a theme on this show, a theme on today's show, and it was a great chat with him regarding his thoughts and beliefs on that and the website and movement that he's trying to get started, people-focused policing, how to improve communication between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. I thank him for sitting down with me on Sunday night to record that interview for Monday. And then, of course, on Wednesday, we had O.J. Spivey. Wednesday was sort of a sports-centric show. Today won't be as sports-centric. We'll be in the final segment, final portion of the show, we will be talking about sticking to sports, linear versus non-linear thinking, but it's only sports related in the general sense, not in any sort of specific sense. But on Wednesday, we definitely had a sports-centric show. It was great to sit down once again with O.J. Spivey, who is a Philly sports guy. We talked about the Olympics. We talked about Simone Manuel. We talked about what it meant for the Black community to have so many young women, and there were men too. We didn't get a chance to really talk about that aspect of it. So many young women competing and doing so well, and what that means. Of course, we talked about the Eagles, DeMarco Murray, among other things, and then of course, my friend and our Denver Broncos correspondent, Jennifer Eakins, joined us live to talk about what's going on with them, the quarterback situation. Will that defense be as good as it was last year? It's looking that way. She said possibly better. So we'll see about that. Stay tuned in for that. And then we also talked about fantasy football. Every week here on the show, we give you your fantasy football fix. And Jennifer writes for 4for4 Football, and it was great to get her thoughts on fantasy sports, on fantasy football, and talk about that as well. When the show is over, we'll be posting links to those interviews and to those shows, and you can also find their Twitter handles in those links. Give them a follow. They're great people. But today's show is devoted to how social media, how the internet age, how social media is contributing to our growing failure to develop and show empathy, how social media is making it worse, and what we can do to stop that while still embracing different points of view by embracing debate. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about how to deal with trolls, people who disagree with us,
which is not the same thing, while still promoting an idea of open debate on Twitter, on Facebook, on other social media. Again, and we'll be tweeting out links once again. We tweeted them out once before. We'll tweet them out again while I play my interview with Matt Wood. We'll tweet them out, and then we'll tweet them out again and include them on the recap of today's podcast, which will be posted on Back Talk with Sharona. But the genesis of this discussion arose out of two articles that were posted in the non-believer community. And today's show is not going to be able to focus too extensively. Matt and I talk about it a little bit on, he identifies as a non-believer, on non-believers versus believers. We'll have a conversation about that at some point because to me it's not as germane. These problems aren't exclusive, by the way, to the non-believer community. They are, you see them in any community, and in the larger community, which is our society as a whole. So it was the really good articles and a great starting point for this discussion because the two articles that I'm referencing have sort of opposing points of view, and I think they both make really great points in identifying and posing the questions that we need to ask ourselves in how we deal with these issues. But the believer versus non-believer conversation is an interesting one. Going into this week, going into today's show, I knew that I had people in my circle who were non-believers. I tend to be, or I at least hope I am, an open thinker, and I think that it maybe attracts people. But I didn't realize how many non-believers that because for reasons that we'll talk about in this show, it's kind of hard to you get judged and you get a lot of hate thrown at you when you identify that way, which is unfortunate. We should embrace diversity. We should embrace people who are different from us. We should encourage people to be able to talk about these things. Unfortunately, we don't, which is why we're having this conversation. I should say starting this conversation because we are not going to stop with just today's show. A lot of really bad things have been done and promulgated in the name of organized religion. Oppression has been promulgated and continued as part of organized religion, and that's not exclusive to one religion. It's across the board. You can see it in all of them, and the ability to think past that. And this is really germane, particularly germane when we get to our final segment, when we start to focus on linear versus nonlinear thinking and our stick to sports sort of discussion with that. But the ability to be, open-minded and to look past. We do so love our labels, and we tend to focus on labels as, and again, this is part of the linear thinking movement. You start if A equals B and B equals C, then A must equal C, and that can present real problems when you're trying to communicate with someone who doesn't share the point of view that you have, and it's difficult to get past those things sometimes and to have a free and open discussion about any particular topic. And so if we can learn to recognize how our thinking patterns and how we communicate with each other can oftentimes lead to an inability to understand one another and to communicate in a good fashion. I think that is, of course, there are people who are just going to not be able to do that, who want to cause dissent, who want to just hate, and that's unfortunate. But tend to try to see the good in people, and to believe that we as a society can improve. We can learn. We can learn from each other if we'll just sit down and listen and communicate. So, it kind of goes back to the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Whether you're a believer or a non-believer, certainly I think we can all agree that the golden rule has some really good, is a really good starting point for how you interact with one another, how you communicate with one another. So we'll go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, my chat with Matt Wood, Chopping It Up with Matt, is a regular feature now on this show. We'll be tweeting out Matt's Twitter handle when we get through, so stay tuned in. You are listening to Bat Talk with Sharona. Welcome back. Here is, now Matt knows this, I can't count. Math is not my finer subject, one of my finer subjects. This is episode 4, right? I get that right? Episode 4 of Chopping It Up with Matt. And,
yes, it is. Yep.
and it's been great. I've really enjoyed it. It's a great series, and it's really an opportunity to, to delve more closely into some of the other topics that we talk about, broach some of the subjects that we're going to discuss, and some of the things that we've touched upon. Privacy. Last week we had a great discussion that we're going to continue regarding privacy in the internet age. Big news today. We record this segment on Wednesday night, and of course the news today, the latest in a series of hacking of famous people. Leslie Jones just the latest in in that, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. And we've talked about the elections and politics. Haven't really gotten back into that. There's still plenty of time. I don't want to get election fatigue. Do you, Matt?
Oh, I do not. Yeah, we got another 3.5 months, a little over 3 months of this shit show. So.
And it's crazy, and we talked about this on the podcast this morning, and I don't have any answers to this. It's something that I want to write about. I'm going to sit down and write about. And by the way, I have to give a shout out to Matt for giving your girl Sharona some help last night. I was trying to I wrote an article, a eulogy, so to speak, a farewell post on my website, Back Talk with Sharona, to Gawker, which is now defunct. The Gawker, the main Gawker name is defunct. The subblogs are still active, and hopefully will do well. I'm a fan, and Matt was very kind to help me, and I really appreciate that, Matt.
Hey, no problem. It was fun to help.
Well, I'm fortunate to have that kind of support system. But we've talked a lot about privacy and social media, and Matt is great to send me things for me to look at, and so he sent me an article, and it's entitled "What's Killing the Atheist Movement." It's really great. We'll be tweeting this out and also putting it in our podcast recaps, but it's by David Smalley. It looks like it was posted on August the 20th, and it really, to me, kind of encapsulates some of the concerns that I have regarding social media and some of the conversations you and I have had, Matt, in that we just don't listen to one another.
Right. We're reply and gotchas and trying to find our allies and our enemies. Mm-hmm. And as it states here in the article, it's like, you had 2 women who were almost exactly the same person, 98% alike. Mm-hmm. And that 2% leads to a flame war over something that could have just been easily discussed. And another thing is like we have to be the right ones. We can never concede, because I don't know where that starts.
Yeah. Well,
if you concede, you are. weak and you are wrong.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is viewed as a weakness, whereas that used to be, I can remember, when showing my age maybe here, but when I was growing up, it was a strength to be able to admit that you were wrong and to be the better person and to take the high road. We don't see too many people taking that high road anymore and trying to facilitate conversation as opposed to just immediately going in and bashing someone or what have you.
Right, and yeah, I remember being in school and all my friends, there'd be times when things would get heated and stuff, and we just kind of walk away from it, and you'd come back and go, sorry, I was being a dick, and of course your friend would say the same thing, it's like, let's just leave it there. We obviously know where we're standing. It's anybody's mind. And then you went and you did it. You watched a movie, whatever kids did.
Yeah. Well, you're not going to change anybody's mind really by coming in and bashing them.
Right.
And unfortunately, we seem to live in an era where that is that has been facilitated and encouraged and allowed. Facebook not so much, and Instagram is mostly pictures. And although if you delve into any celebrities, which I don't very often, but if you delve into any celebrity Instagram into their comments, it's a minefield in there. But
yeah.
and Snapchat, I'm not a big snapper. I don't Snapchat much. I've been, I guess it's the digital version of get off my lawn. I don't get Snapchat. I've tried it. I just don't get it.
Yeah, it's all about in the now, right? That's all what Snapchat is. You catch a video, you take a picture. It's now. It's friends, you put it in your My Story thing, which is only up for 24 hours. I've used it. I try to use it just for quick jokes or make funny little observations. But sometimes if I see something really funny or what I think is funny, everybody else could probably just groan at it. I share it to the same picture on every social media platform. And
well, I would. Yeah, sure.
But, if you're like a social media person, I mean, you gotta keep track of too much shit. You have a Facebook, chat, Instagram.
Yeah.
I don't know if people use Google Plus anymore. There's just too much of that shit. And when you have all that stuff, I mean, and he says in the article, it's like you stop seeing these people as people. They're just this, image on a screen.
It's very dehumanizing. It's extremely dehumanizing.
And plus, you may not even use your real name and your real picture on your stuff. And, it's like, and like what you said, it's like, a very nice looking celebrity could put something up and it's just ungodly, the amount of comments that are just horrendous.
Yeah, we talk about this too. Being a woman online with an online presence and, having any sort of opinion, sharing any sort of photo, personal, anything personal, does seem to oftentimes draw the dregs of society. Or, a lot of times, though, it's just unintentional. People unintentionally say things that, in retrospect, they might not realize, how it's being viewed or taken or whatever. And that's why I think it's so important, and why this article is so important, and why these discussions are so important. Because if you don't talk about these things, then you never progress. There's no progress as a society or as a community. And the title of this article, and this is particularly germane to the atheist movement, but what he's talking about can apply across the board. I mean, it's a great primer for any community and for society at large.
Oh yeah, so I identify as a non-believer.
I have several friends that do.
Oh yeah, and I remember a few years ago, there was this concept that came out, Atheism Plus,
Yeah.
Which was, you're an atheist, but hey, you kind of go out there in the community and help things, and it was bringing more humanism into atheism, and holy hell, was there a shitstorm.
Oh, yeah?
I mean, people were just like, no.
We do so love our labels.
I don't even know. Yeah, and it was just, I don't know. It's like one of those things. Ever see that film Burn After Reading?
I have not.
Oh, well, you're at the end, you're just like, what the fuck happened?
Yeah?
Because there's so much back and forth, and there was such a flame war before I could kind of wrap my head around what the hell was going on. The whole conversation ended.
Very interesting.
But yeah, I mean, in regards to the atheist movement, I mean, there's, who are atheists and humanists who, want to reach out, that don't care other people believe in God or not. And there's other people who feel like they should, let people know there's no God. And then you got anti-theists who just not only don't believe in God, but are really adamant, about not having a God. Which I'm sure I butchered like the full definition here, because I'm pretty much in the camp of, hey, yeah, I don't believe in God, but that's my thing. That's not your thing. That's just do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting somebody. And I mean, and even secularism can be a bad thing. Look at just what happened in France. That woman, her burqa ripped off of her. It's like you're still coercing that woman to have clothes that you feel as a society giving her the agency. That's not liberation. Still coercion.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about that. I talked about it this morning. We're going to talk about it some more. It's going to be I've read a very, very good article at medium.com regarding it. We're going to be tweeting that out and talking about it. And it talks about, how ironic it is. The male gaze has for so long defined, what is proper and valuable as it relates to women, and it contains a very good discussion of that. But it's also so ironic because, this is a beach that allows topless sunbathing, and it's also a beach where the bodies of dead children have washed up as a result of the refugee crisis. And that, the burqa, the burkini, which is seen, as a symbol of something that it's not, that she's being forced to strip, is very symptomatic of a lot of different things. Well, we're not going to get in. I don't want to tie up your and my time with that, but we're definitely going to be talking about that on Friday's show. I have to say this, and this is just an aside, but it was when Matt sent me this article, I didn't have really a chance to take a look at it until today. So I pulled it up, and the first thing that popped out at me was it's called Dogma Debate. There's a podcast and some other things that is, this website is called pathos.com, and the blog is called Dogma Debate. And not too long ago, there was a thing that was popular on Twitter, on social media, 7 favorite films, and Dogma is one of my favorite films. So that's just, kind of a weird aside there, but it made me kind of chuckle a little bit.
Oh yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites as well. And kind of going back to his article when he was just talking about like the 2 women there, 98% alike. I remember how far back it was. Could have been a year, could have been 6 months. But Bill Maher on his show, Real Time on HBO, hit one of his, because he does, I'm not sure if you've watched his show, but he does these new rules where they're all jokes, and at the end he has like a closing monologue commentary. And his whole thing was kind of about this, where people were pissed off at him because, he's a liberal, but he's, saying and doing things that people think a liberal shouldn't be, and all that stuff. And I think this kind of came after it probably came after a few weeks after the Ben Affleck, Sam Harris thing, but he's like, so I say this, is it a big deal? No, we're on the same fucking side.
Yeah.
So
I had to break up with Bill Maher because he has exhibited some quite extreme examples of misogyny and sexism, and once, twice, three times, four times, at some point it becomes a pattern, and you're like, okay, well, but I do think that a lot of what he does brings a valuable conversation, and I did used to enjoy his show quite a bit.
Oh yeah, and like now it's just I don't have. There is so much content I consume, which is probably a bad thing. That I would watch it for the panel, and the new rules at the end were just like the cherry on top. But now I'm just like, let me just go to the new rules. Let me just get to the funny stuff. And because now I get the alternate views. There's a couple websites where you can where it goes where it kind of labels something blue or red or white or gray if it's in the middle. That way you can kind of get differing perspectives on the events of the day.
Yeah, and also going back to the article, it's interesting because there are. This is the part that really was fascinating to me, and that kind of struck a note with me. And he said it's roughly about, I guess about a third of the way into it. It says we're becoming the fuck off generation, and it's embarrassing. And I'm quoting directly from the article. Yes, some people cross the line, but there are always deeper reasons fueling whatever you see on the surface. If after investigating the issue, talking with each other, and trying to get to the bottom of it like adults, you're unable to reconcile, then parting ways is perfectly fine. But this instant agree with me or fuck off mentality that happens within 6 minutes of a controversial Facebook post is asinine. And that resonates with me because I do think that we do that so often. We see somebody say empathy and the ability to relate to and listen to and try to understand someone else's point of view is going the way of the dodo bird, and it's really very troubling to me.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And I was talking about this with a friend of mine a couple days ago, where you have in text and social media and stuff. It's not like reading a book. When you read a book and read text, the author describes the tone. When we talk to each other, we hear the tone in our voice and our inflections and things. But if you just say something, I disagree with that, here is why I'm saying it like that, that's saying something, it seems, welcoming discussion on, social media, I disagree, here's why, and there's no context clues. Now, I try to take everything as a positive. That way it keeps the mood down. But I see where people immediately take that as a criticism against them and just start going. And, people take beliefs very personally. People got to be a little bit more fluid.
Yeah. Well, we do so love our labels. And you and I talked that our first little sit-down chat talked about that, and how we're so committed to labels that we don't stop to think. We see the word atheist, or we see the word liberal, or we see the word conservative, and instead of looking behind the label and seeing whatever it is, the point that's being made, or the conversation that is going on, we just see that label and we instantly form our own, thoughts and opinions without really sitting down to read or listen or what have you. And it leads to a lot of miscommunication. It leads to a lot of misunderstanding, and it leads to a lot of it leads to a lack of a full debate, an open discussion on things.
Yeah, and I remember being younger. And, new to the whole world of politics, religion, and the whole world, and, just being strictly my side, and everything else was wrong, and, oh, man, I was such a bastard. But, all it takes, like, is a human interaction of someone who doesn't necessarily agree with you. I mean, in the military, I would say X, and someone would say Y, and I'm like, well, why is that? Curiosity, not to be a dick or anything. And as I kept doing that more and more, I kind of let go of all that. Oh, I have to be right. I have to. I started seeing as people who have their own thoughts, and they're all trying to get to work and live life happily with their families and things of that nature. But when you're online, all you do is see a picture, and you're like, that's a good target for me to go hit on.
Yeah. Another interesting thing from this article, and I've scrolled down to the part that drew your attention the most, and that's the Facebook fight between these two women who probably, as the author very rightfully pointed out, had much more in common than they did in disagreement, but yet couldn't get past that one little thing that they disagree, and couldn't get past the insults that they were hurling at one another.
It's right there.
Yeah, and And I guess it's, we tend to have themes within themes upon this show, and it's pretty funny because it really does boil down to ego. And as Matt knows, that was a central focus of the article that I wrote on Gawker, hubris, and how ego does tend to become our worst enemy, lead us, down past that. If we, put it aside, we'd just be much better off. We travel better paths and be more enlightened and just better human beings.
Yeah, I mean, they have that saying, or pride go before the fall.
Yeah.
I've learned to swallow my pride. A lot of times. I mean, hubris is usually followed by a nice, healthy dose of humility.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think we've all had those circumstances, sure.
And it's, I mean, granted, it serves a purpose because now you're like, oh, something, or I was a little off the mark there, but what you should be doing is going, take that as a lesson. If you were in the wrong, apologize, own up to the mistake, and change yourself to where it doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
Too many times, though, we fail to do.
Yeah, we're going to move past this article and continue our discussion because I want to talk about breakups in the social media era. But I want to quote from this, and I think that it's very wise words, and we could all learn from them. And it's at the, I guess, central part of the article. Again, we'll be tweeting out this article. It says, let's grow up. Let's let our friends be wrong. Let's disagree without attacks. Let's stop this. If you believe X, then you're automatically Y. False dichotomy. Let's pick up the phone and have conversations when we disagree. If you don't have their phone number, send them a private message asking to get on Skype to talk it out. Find where you agree first and hash out the details. Agree to disagree and move on. And those are very wise words from David Smalley. And I thank Matt for sending me this article. We'll be tweeting it out. It's great. It really is. Again, it's talking about what's killing the atheist community, but wise words from that can be applied across the board. And my belief system just keeps evolving and changing as I get older. And I grew up. My family is have long-standing members of the Church of Christ. I converted to Catholicism. About 15 years ago, I suppose. I don't practice. It's again, that's just a label. I would probably be more aligned with humanism than anything else. Is there a divine power? I'm open to that. I think that there probably are forces out there that we don't understand, and we're not going to maybe we'll get into that at some other time. But I certainly understand agnostics and atheists who have questions and who have doubts, and I'll share some stories about that later. But it's funny that we're talking about this. But just real quick, I want to mention that I read another article one day this week, and it was talking about breaking up in the social media era and how how you unfriend and you block and all of that, but that digital trail is forever.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Glad I grew up before social media. I mean, I can't imagine being a kid putting your heart all out there, and you know how you were as a teenager. Oh, this love's gonna last
Oh, yeah.
and oh no, here comes reality.
Yeah.
I mean, you're heartbroken. But then they
Yeah.
to social media, and oh God, so embarrassing.
Yeah.
And then now granted, when you broke up in middle school, high school, what have you, that was it. You saw them every day. That probably didn't help right there in the beginning.
Yeah.
They immediately had someone else, and
I all the time say that Twitter, in particular, I'm not. Facebook I know is too. I'm not a huge Facebooker, but these social media communities are very much like high school.
Mhm. Oh yeah, that's why I try to pick a little bit of every little community, just like me in high school.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I'll be friends with everybody.
That's totally the way I was too, and we'll have to have that. Well, we'll add that as a discussion. We don't have time. We're running right at 30 minutes, so we're going to have to wrap things up. But yeah, I was the same way, and I particularly sort of gravitated, I suppose, toward the outcast and ostracized because I felt so bad for them, and the reasons why they were made fun of, ostracized, always bugged me. That's always been a part of my of my mindset, my makeup, is that I hate to see people treated unjustly and unfairly. And so, but it definitely is. And I try to, be understanding about people who have different viewpoints from me. Where I draw the line, though, and where I will, maybe cut ties is if there's a pattern of abusive behavior.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Now we all make mistakes, and I understand and recognize that because I know that I have. But I do try to be understanding.
Yeah, definitely. I always tell the wife and whatever. I'm like, yeah, they're a toxic person. I'm like, right now you don't need to be around them. I mean, and I'm not telling her who to be friends with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just offering my input when
right.
If she gets upset by a friend that just seems to be taking advantage all the time.
Your life will dramatically improve if you cut toxic people out of it. And I did that. It's been a couple of years, 2 or 3 years ago. I made a very concerted effort to cut toxic people out of my life, and my life has my mood, everything has dramatically improved. It's life-changing, and I can't recommend it more. We're not going to have a chance to really get into this new DNA law in Kuwait. I'm going to add that to next week. We'll talk about that. And, Matt, if there's anything else you want to talk about, we'll have to add that too. We're going to be recording on a different night next week, so we may actually play this segment on Wednesday, since I think it sounds like Matt and I are going to sit down on Tuesday night.
Yeah.
So, all right, Matt, tell everybody where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter at Woodstock, W00DSTOK.
He's not an over-tweeter like me, but he's definitely a good follow and a great guy, and I'm very fortunate to have him as part of my circle. And again, thanks for helping me last night. And I look forward to this. It's such a fun time. I look forward to this every week.
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite things to do throughout the week.
All right, Matt, stay on the line. I'm going to go ahead and cut off the recording.
Okay.
All right, shout out to Matt, as always, for joining me. Episode 4 just played, and we'll have episode 5 next week. We probably will play that episode on Wednesday. We did 3 regular podcasts this week, and I did a lot of radio. And if we set up today's show actually for an hour and a half, we might actually be able to wrap up within an hour. If we can do that, that's fine. You've had enough of me this week, and frankly, it's been a lot, and it's really kind of cut into my writing schedule, my writing time. So next week we're not going to be doing 3 regular shows. I can just the way our guests lined up. That's why we did it like that this week. Next week, I think we'll probably be sticking to 2 regular podcasts. Hopefully, we'll be able to get back to doing a down and dirty episode or 2. I do enjoy those. They're a lot quicker, seem to flow a little bit better when we're talking about some of these topics. So we'll see how that goes. Definitely give Matt a follow out there. And once again, shout out to all of the guests this week. It was interesting listening to that conversation. It sort of reminds me of a lot of different things, and I keep going back to the story that David Smalley told in his article regarding the 2 women who had much more in common than they did in disagreements, yet they just couldn't get past that one thing. And it really is kind of emblematic, I think, of a lot of the problems that we have in our world, that a lot of the problems that you see in communities across the world, and it goes back to ego and hubris and linear thinking, which we're going to get into here in a minute in our stick to sports discussion that's coming up next. But let's wrap up the conversation that I had with Matt. It's interesting that we do seem to be living in, if you're sensitive to bad language, you might want to tune out right now, because we're going to be referencing some of the discussion in David Smalley's article. We do seem to be living in the fuck off generation, where when we disagree with someone, how do we handle that? How do we follow up with it? Do we follow up with someone when we see someone say something and we feel like we have something to contribute to that conversation? Do we do it? How do we do it? Or do we simply look at that person and say, oh, I disagree with them, click, hit the unfollow button, or click, hit the block button, or, whatever. Social media is so dehumanizing in that you don't, as Matt so wisely pointed out, you don't get voice inflection. You don't get, the written word can be deceiving and can be, and doesn't communicate tone, doesn't communicate personality, doesn't communicate inflection, and I think that, of course, the counter argument, the counter article that we tweeted out earlier would say, I've never had anybody, people just don't do that. I've never had anybody do that. Well, I think that begs the question, why don't we do that? Why don't we embrace open debate? To me, that's a very linear thinking kind of response to that. Well, we don't do it, so that's bullshit. Well, why don't we do it? Why don't we follow up when we disagree with someone, or when maybe we see someone that we think who's a linear thinking and who starts a discussion with a false hypothesis? How do we respond to that, and how do we communicate with that person? And I think how we go about it is important, but it also requires them to come to that discussion, to come to that debate, if you will, not just with an open mind, but with an open heart. And unfortunately, I think that because Twitter, social media, Facebook tends to be such a hive mind, it tends to be a groupthink kind of mechanism, that we don't embrace debate. We embrace, more often than not, we embrace hate, and it's unfortunate. It is very high schoolish. I had forgotten that I brought that up. It is a very high schoolish mentality. It is a very high schoolish type of you see, just like in high school, cliques start to form, and you see popular people with more followers embracing other people with more followers. Nothing irks me more than for someone to say, "Oh, you don't have enough followers, therefore you don't have a valid opinion," which is complete and utter bullshit. But it's very high schoolish too, right? I mean, it's very cliquish, high schoolish type mentality, type behavior. And it's always interesting to me to watch other people. How we talk about things is what drives me, and what has driven a lot of my work, and what drives this show. But it's also interesting to talk about Twitter, social media, Facebook, whatever social media platform you're using as a free speech device, because one of the things one of the disagreements that I have with the Twitter model of business, besides the fact that they keep adding stuff that nobody asked for, that nobody wants, instead of listening to their users. Well, all we wanted was an edit function, but we're getting all this stuff that I don't use, and I feel like in their own mind they're trying. I know that it's not a profit. The profits drive the world. It's not what they want, or they're trying to be more competitive, so they think that they have to compete with these other platforms. But I think they're missing the main point. Make a good product, and then people will come, right? Instead of trying to be what you're not, be good at what you are. But one of the things that really bugs me about the Twitter model is that in their motto, I suppose, in their business model, that they think that they're promoting free speech. We want to promote free speech. It often is quite the opposite. Because when we're talking about trolls, when we're talking about online harassment, when we're talking about the banning of Milo, what we're talking about are people who are the antithesis of free speech. They're trying to shut down speech. They're trying to shut down the voices of women. They're trying to shut down the voices of minorities. That is not free speech advocacy. That is the antithesis of free speech advocacy. And Twitter needs to ban those people. Twitter needs to do a better job of thinking beyond the label free speech and really thinking about what that means. If you're going to be a platform that promotes free speech, you don't allow users to go out and engage in targeted harassment that is designed to shut down the voices of women. Period. So I got off a little bit on a tangent, but that just, oh my gosh, that just irks me to no end. Hubris has kind of been a theme this week. You saw that in the article, the farewell article that I wrote to Gawker. Hubris means that you come to a conversation with a preconceived set of notions, which is linear thinking in a nutshell. A will C, A plus C must, A plus, it's really, and linear thinking is often generalized, I suppose, to be quote unquote logical thinking. But I'm not, as generalizations go, I think that really is an overgeneralization. We'll get into that when we get into our stick to sports discussion. I think when it boils down to it, and to try and wrap up the conversation that Matt and I had, I think, if we could recognize that what binds us together as communities, as human beings, is far more powerful and strong than what divides us. But you have to come to that conversation, again, with an open mind and with an open heart. If you're not willing to embrace an idea beyond your preconceived notion, if you stick simply to whatever label it is that you associate yourself with, then we're never going to come to any understanding, and that is germane to everything. Whether you're an atheist, non-believer, Christian. What does Christian mean? What does that even mean? What does it mean to be a Christian? I mean, that's a good discussion. We'll have to add that, because very often you see people who profess to be Christian acting in very non-Christian ways. What would Jesus do? Well, Jesus, if you've read the Bible, was a character an individual who associated with a lot of different people that, as Matt and I were taught, he associated with the outcast. He associated with people that popular thinking would say were beneath him. And yet, that's and that sort of goes back to the whole social media brand of communicating, where the elites who gather other elites don't interest me. That doesn't interest me. I'm not interested in those people. What would Jesus do? What would any prominent person in any organized religious movement do? And how they act, how they interact, and what they think is it is important. And if you pay attention to those things, I think that you often see what that particular organization is all about. So it's interesting. These two articles, very divergent points of view. Let's grow up. Let's let our friends be wrong. Let's disagree without attacks. And it's kind of funny. I didn't even, when I was making the notes for today, I didn't even realize that David Smalley had kind of organized his in a little bit of a way that resembles what we're getting ready to talk about, which is the sticking to sports part of it. Let's stop this. If you believe X, then you're automatically Y, false dichotomy. That's linear thinking, right? Linear thinking starts with a hypothesis. Sometimes it's called the Socratic method, but it starts with a hypothesis, and which is a label. That hypothesis is a label, and if you're so committed to that label that you can't, it's an efficient way, right? But it doesn't always encompass diversity or diverse points of view. So it's interesting. We don't have to divide and conquer. The world is quite capable of doing that without us contributing to it. And we do seem to be living in an era where being right and being wrong is far more important than trying to figure out why somebody believes a certain set of principles, or why someone identifies with a certain set of principles. And the thing about this counter argument, I think that bothers me, and we should, if someone is harassing someone on social media, or in a restaurant, or in a school, bullying, we should take measures to I don't want to say isolate, but to make sure that that's that doesn't happen, whether it's banning on Twitter. But where is the follow-up? I don't think it's possible to make Milo a better person, to make him a good person. I think he's a prime example of someone who probably doesn't have very many redeeming qualities and isn't capable of coming to a conversation with an open mind and being willing to engage in open debate. But what do you do with that person? Is rehabilitation possible? Can you salvage a relationship, as tenuous as it might be, by following up with someone in a private manner? And this counter article would suggest that that's not possible, that we, keeping our fights private isn't possible because there is no follow-up. And I'll read from the article. Not once in my entire history of blogging, open parentheses, over a decade, close parenthesis, or my entire history of internet interactions going on 25 years or more, has anyone politely called me up to have a private fight about something. I can't even imagine it happening. I probably look at my phone in disbelief and say, dude, take it to the internet. We can take our time and write stuff with substance and put it on record instead of babbling on social media or whatever. And, that, to me, that shuts down communication. That shuts down open debate. While it may be true, it doesn't have to be true. It doesn't. We don't have to. The two Facebook friends don't have to block and unfriend each other and be stewing in their own juices over a disagreement about one thing when they can embrace the 99 things that they do agree about. But we don't stop to have that thought process. We don't stop to have that discussion. We're so committed to the petty stuff, to the disagreement, that we can't get beyond it. And it's really unfortunate that that we live in that kind of society, but it is what it is, and we do seem to be living in those times. So I don't know. It's definitely kind of an unfortunate thing. I'm very quickly scrolling through these two articles to see if there's anything else. We'll tweet these out. It's an interesting discussion. We'll have to continue to have that discussion. But we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, sticking to sports, linear versus non-linear thinking. Excuse me. So stay tuned in. You are listening to Bat Talk with Sharona. All right, welcome back. You're listening to Bat Talk with Sharona. I am your host. My name is Sharona. As always, I thank you for tuning in. Stick to sports is kind of the topic of our next little discussion. We've got about 30 minutes left. We may not go that long. We've kind of touched upon some of these things in the first hour. You've had enough of me. It's been a long week. We will continue to have these conversations. Shout out to Matt Wood, as always. Episode 4 played in the first hour of Chopping It Up with Matt. It's always a pleasure to sit down with him and to talk to him. He's a great guy. If you're not following him out there on social media, give him a follow. He definitely does not overtweet like I do, but he's still a great follow. Also, shout out once again to the guests who were on the show. On Monday, we had Officer Darren Clark, who came on and talked about his involvement with law enforcement and the people-focused policing movement that he has started. It was a great discussion. Communication is definitely so key, and it's particularly germane to today's show. if we can learn to communicate better, I think society's problems would be a lot better. Also on Wednesday, thanks to OJ Spivey and Jennifer Eakins who joined me, we'll be tweeting out their links to their interviews as well as where you can follow them on social media. Stick to sports. I get that a lot. You see that a lot, that debate. Do you stick to sports? Do you not stick to sports? And to me, it represents, what is kind of a theme to this show, and that is linear versus nonlinear thinking. And the stick to sports debate starts with the hypothesis that sports is the only important thing. Sports is this is it. Sports is the main thing. Sports is the only thing. It is the hypothesis by which everything else flows, which is very linear thinking. Linear thinking is often characterized as logical, whereas nonlinear thinking is often characterized as creative. Those are very much overgeneralizations, but it's a good starting point. And linear thinking might seem to be efficient in the sense that it starts with a hypothesis, and you can very quickly move, through the series of subsequent, hypothesis to a conclusion. But what happens when it starts with a false equivalency, right, or a false premise? If A equal B and B equals C, then A equals C. That's very rigid and very, very incapable of accounting for let's borrow chaos theory. Let's borrow a term from Jurassic Park. Chaos theory would tell you that there are always outside forces that operate to affect A, to affect B, and to affect C. So A might equal B, but that doesn't necessarily equate to, and B might equal C, but it doesn't necessarily equate to A equals C. And for that reason, it's, linear thinkers often have difficulty engaging debate because they are stuck on that false starting point. And this is why hive mind or groupthink becomes such a thing, right? Hive mind is very much a linear way of thinking in that it starts with a hypothesis and carries from there. And again, it's often called the Socratic method. It's typically led to a lot less diversity, not just in thought, but in a variety of ways, in multiple ways. Linear thinking has been responsible for, for exclusion of women and minorities in a variety of things, because it started with the hypothesis that one group was only capable of doing certain things. A equals B. One group is only capable of doing certain things. And when you start with a false hypothesis, then you're not going to get a lot of diversity. And nonlinear thinking is often characterized as less constructive and more expansive. Creative thinking, by definition, is hard to define. And there's a lot of stereotypical type of labels that say scientists, accountants. They're analytical types. They're linear thinkings, while artists and designers and musicians are creative types, and they're nonlinear thinkings. But there's a lot of crossover there. A lot of times you can have a linear thinker who's simply disorganized and not very, not very. I would probably put myself in that category. In that, linear thinkers sort of think through things logically, but not always in any sort of pattern. So it's kind of interesting. So the stick to sports debate comes to the discussion with the hypothesis that sports is the only thing, is the most important thing, and therefore anything else is unimportant and not worthy of consideration. A equals B, and so it excludes any outside forces that might tend to try to suggest that the hypothesis sports is the most important thing and the only thing is wrong, and that's a very exclusionary way of thinking, and a very I want to say off-putting, but it is kind of off-putting, right? That that capable of talking about sports, but talking about other things too, because sports as a whole contains a wide variety of people with a wide variety of gender, of sexual orientation, of humans. We're diverse, and I'm not saying that it's always like that, but it can lead to that kind of thinking, and to me that's the concern, that we get so linear in our thinking that we don't allow for the introduction of new thought processes, of new hypotheses, of a new way of thinking, of new people engaging in the debate. It's it used to be that sports media as a whole was very insular, and that's changed, and it's changing, and that's great. But it goes back to that linear way of thinking, that one group is only capable of engaging in that type of activity. And so when you open yourself up to the thought process that that we can have a wide variety of that, it's not just about sports, that it's about other things as well, then you get a more, first of all, you get more diverse people, but you also get a more diverse discussion, a more vibrant discussion, a discussion that's more open and not insulated to a very narrow range of ideas, a very narrow range of thoughts, and that's kind of the way I tend to look at it. Is minds don't always naturally work in straight lines, right? I mean, our minds are constantly shifting and making associations and making a wide variety of connections. And if you allow for a nonlinear method of thinking about the sports discussion as a whole, then I think you're going to tend to get more diversity. You're going to tend to get a more vibrant debate, a more vibrant community, a more vibrant method of doing things, a more inclusive of doing things. Embrace debate has kind of inherited, if you will, a negative connotation because, first of all, and I hate to say this, but it's true. The Embrace Debate hashtag, if you will, came from First Take, which is first and foremost, it's entertainment, and if you look at it as entertainment as opposed to anything else, then it's a little easier to understand. But it doesn't always hasn't always been associated with embracing debate in that logical manner, perhaps that linear thinkers would want to embrace. But embrace is good, and embracing debate is good, and having diverse viewpoints and having diversity in who has those viewpoints, those are good things. Those can make that community, that discussion, the debate, whatever we're talking about, it can make it better. And if we open ourselves up to that, then I think that we, as a society in general, would be a lot better off. So that's that's kind of where I come from in that stick to sports thing. I'm not a one-dimensional person, and I don't think anybody is a one-dimensional person. Really, I don't. I think that we're all diverse people in the sense that we have interests outside of whatever. If your only thing is sports and that's it, and you don't have relationships, you don't see movies, you don't go out in the community, you don't have discussions with other people outside of sports, I can't imagine being that way. Maybe there are people that way, and if more power to you if that's who you are, if that's what you are. More power to you. I'm not hating on you. I don't understand it, and I would love to have a conversation with you about it, about how that came about, and about what your average day is like, what it means to be someone whose only thought process, whose only mindset is sports only. I don't know anybody like that, and if you're like that, hit me up out there on Twitter, Sports by Sharona. Send me an email, sportsbysharona@gmail.com. I would love to have a conversation with you. I'm not in a hating kind of way. Just I want to understand what that is and how you got there and what that means, so that I can understand it. Because I come from a different point of view. I come from a point of view where things matter outside of sports. It matters that that we have diversity. It matters that we have an open-minded discussion about a lot of different things. So, let's have that discussion. Let's have that debate. Listen, if I have said anything to upset you or to make you mad, come to me and tell me. I'm willing to have that conversation. You don't want to do it? You want to have a private conversation about it? I can have that too. I had one this morning as I was preparing for this show. We should have those conversations. We should be open to having those conversations. We should be open to understanding that there are people who don't think like us, who have experiences that matter, that aren't the same experience that we've had. What binds us is far more powerful and strong than what divides us. And if we could ever come to a recognition and understanding, then I think that we would have a much better society, and have a much better understanding of one another. So, all right, that's it for moving on. That's it for the stick to sports discussion. That's it for today. We're going to wrap things up a little bit earlier than we anticipated. You've had enough of me this week. I've had enough of me this week. Once again, shout out to Officer Darren Clark, who joined me on Monday, and to OJ Spivey and Jennifer Eakins, who joined me on Wednesday, and of course to Matt, who started the ball rolling for today's discussion. And shout out to David Smalley, who who wrote that first article and who reached out on Twitter. I think that David Smalley and I could be friends. His reaching out to me was a prime example. I think of the two things, the things that that we're talking about, the article that he wrote and the discussion that we've had on this show today. And also shout out to the gentleman who wrote the other article, because I think that it certainly brings, a thought process and an attitude that that we can recognize. And if we can recognize it, then we can have a conversation about it. And if we can have a conversation about it, then we can come to an understanding about it. So shout out to both of those guys, and shout out to you, the listeners. Thanks for tuning in. We will be back next week, definitely on Wednesday. I'm hoping to get Miss Chels. Chels is right out there on Twitter. I'm hoping to get her on the show next week. If not next week, then hopefully soon, as well as some other people. Josh Taylor, we've got to get Josh Taylor back on here. It's been way too long since we've had him. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend. We'll be back next week with more Back Talk with Sharona. You can follow me on Twitter at Sports by Sharona. And thanks for tuning in.